What's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I'm Cody Goodwin. We've got the whole gang here, Mike Rodak, Alex Scarborough. We have a lot that's going on in the Alabama sports world currently. Men's basketball is going to play in the SEC tournament later this week in Nashville. Women's basketball had a disappointing performance in Greenville at the SEC women's basketball tournament. Baseball off to the hottest start in program history. Softball doing their thing. But we are going to keep today's show strictly football. We are 1 week into spring football practices. We were able to talk to Kalen DeBoer, offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb, defensive coordinator Kane Womack, all last week. And so we are going to kind of empty out the notebook a little bit on today's show with just some more things that we learned. They're off this week. They will come back next week. So we'll get to talk to, I think, more players on Tuesday. But getting to talk to the coordinators, getting to talk to DeBoer, figured now was a good time to just kind of look back, reflect. What did we learn? Did we learn anything? We each just kind of picked a couple of things that I figured we could dive into a little bit more in depth and discuss. And yeah, that's kind of what we're going to do today. Alex, I'll let you lead things off. What was something you learned last week? Did you learn anything at all last week?
It's hard to say you learn anything definitive after 3 practices. I mean, we got to be a little bit honest about that. At the end of the day, they're not even halfway through spring practice, and you can debate whether spring practice you actually learn anything. If you're putting me on the spot to pick the first thing, I think you got to go with the most obvious thing. We learned that they like their quarterbacks, that they all have something to them, and that this Keelan Russell guy is really talented. He's either Jake Haener or Michael Penix or both of those guys. That's what Ryan Grubb said he reminded him of. They're not pumping the brakes on him at all. Gained a little bit of weight. We learned that going into spring practice and seems to be handling it very well so far. Does that equate to winning the starting job going into week 1? Who the heck knows? Ty Simpson's not somebody to be written off. The same can be said of Austin Mack. But I will say the more they talk about Keelan Russell, the more it reminds me of the way they talked about Ryan Williams at this time a year ago. And the fact that they're not afraid of the hype with this guy. It's a different position, obviously. But at the end of the day, I think it does say something about what they think he's capable of sooner or later.
So what was said about Keelan specifically? This is from offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb, who we got to talk to for the first time since he officially became Alabama's offensive coordinator. He said a number of different things about Keelan and the quarterbacks in general, but when asked specifically about Keelan and just how he compares to other young quarterbacks that he's worked with, this was the full quote. One of the things I noticed thinking about Jake Haener way back at Fresno State, he's with the Saints now. Jake's got a really whippy, quick release. Once he made his decision, he was very decisive with the ball. I see that with Keelan a lot. And then Keelan's vision reminds me of Michael Penix a little bit. He has good wide vision with the field. He can see it even when he doesn't know exactly what's going on. So he's still working through all of the processes, but he'll get there. He's a good player. Is that like, and I understand getting excited about a 5-star quarterback who's the number 2 overall prospect coming in, but that sounds like pressure, right? Or like, is this kid really going to be that good?
It is pressure, but I'll tell you why I think more so than what Ryan Grubb said, more so than what Kalen DeBoer said a week ago, is what Kalen told me 2 or 3 weeks ago, whatever it was. When I asked him specifically about Keelan Russell and what expectations should be for a true freshman. And he told me we have played freshmen before, but more important than that, it's how you handle yourself. And this dude can handle himself. He's already got the confidence part of it. He can already manage the team, was the vibe I got from his answer. So it's tremendous expectations. It is pressure. But the thing I go back to is a year ago, I was asking the same thing about what they were saying about Ryan Williams, to the point that you guys remember I was asking Nick Sheridan, what's reasonable expectations for a true freshman? Basically giving him the opportunity to pump the brakes on this guy if they wanted to. And he said, no, this guy can play. I mean, that's where they're at. And maybe that's just how they talk about guys. That's possible. But I think you kind of have to take them at their word, especially when you're talking about the highest ranked player to come in a 247 rankings, been doing it for a long time. Highest ranked guy to ever go to Alabama. Keeping that guy off the field is going to be very difficult. And as well positioned as I think Ty Simpson is, he has to know right now that Keelan Russell's right on his heels.
Mike, I'm curious, what did you make of the comments that DeBoer and Grubb had on Keelan this past week?
I mean, it wasn't necessarily those. I've been saying it on here for a while. Did I not talk about freshman quarterbacks and like rookie quarterbacks, high draft picks in the NFL? Like, you don't just go out and get a guy like that to sit him on the bench. And the whole idea of like college football yonder, where it was, we're going to sit our big 5-star freshman for a year and then he's going to make his triumphant debut a year later. And that was back when guys got there in the summer. In the old days, when a 5-star would get here in August. Now a 5-star gets here in January. In Keelan's case, he could have gotten here in December, but he had the Under Armour All-Star game to go to, and I think his high school playoff. So in some cases, those guys are getting here in December, 9 months before they even start their first game. And I think even Kalen has talked about it, where at a certain point, like, those guys aren't even freshmen anymore. You get through bowl practice, if you're here for that, you get through the spring, you have a decent amount of experience under your belt in college. And so this whole idea of like, you're just a wide-eyed freshman who doesn't know what the hell he's doing or thinking, I don't think this staff thinks that way. Maybe Nick Saban did to some extent, because Nick Saban was older school, but there also were players in Nick Saban that walked in as freshmen. You could tell we're ready to play right away. Will Anderson came in. You're like, all right, he's going to be all right. And he played right away, and he was gone in 3 years. So that's kind of the reality. If you're that good, the clock's ticking. You don't just want to waste a year, because you may only have 3 years. If you're the school looking at the player, you may only have 3 years with them. Why would you just throw away 33% of that? Number two, if he doesn't play, you're risking him going to the portal, paying him to play somewhere else year two. So the whole idea of sitting a guy just because he's a freshman, I think, is antiquated. And that has been my stance on Keelan Russell since he committed to Alabama, since they signed him. So I don't know if it necessarily has changed or been modified at all this week. I'll just reiterate that I think we're more likely to see him sooner than later. And I don't think there's any hesitation from this staff on playing a freshman. I do think it's an interesting scenario with them opening on the road this year. And I think a pretty important game just for the vibe of the program, going to play at Florida State. But even then, you get the sense that Kalen DeBoer might not be all that afraid of starting a freshman in that situation either. And he might make the point that Ty Simpson also has no career starts. Austin Mack has no career starts. And that the gap between the actual playing live experience of Ty Simpson and Keelan Russell is not all that wide, even though there's 3 years of college experience being a difference between them.
And if you're wondering, are Mike and Alex parsing words too much and diving too much into what Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer said, I present to you Ryan Grubb's answers on A.K. Deere, a talented true freshman, and Michael Carroll, a talented true freshman. He said absolutely nothing. He basically said those guys have got a long way to go, and that was it. He did not say that with the quarterback. He did not say that with Keelan Russell. So, again, it could just all be words, but they're not using those words for every freshman they're talking about. They're using them for their quarterback. The quarterback that is the first guy they got to pick, who just so happened to become the biggest damn recruit Alabama's ever had.
I think that's a fair point. We're excited to see what A.K. Deere ultimately becomes. I think we're really excited to see Michael Carroll potentially be an option to start for Alabama this year. And I think it's an important point too, because Grubb also has a history of offensive line coaching, and the fact that he didn't say as much about Carroll. Again, the caveat, we're 3 practices in. What have they actually done? What have they actually learned? We aren't 100% sure. I'm sure as the OC, he probably wants to spend a little bit more time with the quarterbacks than maybe the offensive line. That's important to note here too. But I think that's a fair point, that he was noticeably more excited, more willing to talk about Keelan and the quarterbacks than he was a Michael Carroll, who I think we all believe, to use him as an example, is a guy that we feel can contribute immediately this season as well. And that's could be just a product of the positions, could be just a product of the way Grubb approached the first few practices.
And look, Carroll's playing out of position. He gets to campus, he thinks he's going to be a guard, he's playing tackle. So I'm not saying this is a negative to AK or Carroll. It's not at all. It's just a reflection on, I think, how they feel where Keelan is already in his development.
Remember before we hit record and we were like, are we really going to find 6 things that we can talk about? And here we are going 10 minutes on the quarterback.
Honestly, we could spend the whole podcast just talking about the quarterback situation from now until August 30th.
Maybe we'll do that after spring ball officially wraps up. But that's a good way to start it off. Just Keelan Russell, very clearly they're excited about this guy. I think we knew that going in, but just to get confirmation from DeBoer and Grubb was nice to hear during the first week of spring practice. Mike, give me something that you learned first week of spring.
I think the transfer class in general is kind of where I'm going to go. And I don't know if this overlaps specifically with what some of you guys are going to say. It obviously wasn't a headline transfer class. I'm pulling up the team rankings on that. They're filling holes on the back end of the roster, I think, with guys, like Peter Knudsen and Arko Newwam and Jaden Hobson and Blake Dowd, the punter. Obviously, our focus is probably more on the guys like Horton, Hill Green, Calhoun, Washington, Dewberry, Collins. There's obviously a lot of excitement, I think, with that transfer portal class. I think a lot of those guys committed within like a 3 or 4 day span in December. My whole idea of which guys might play is kind of shifted, I think, is kind of my takeaway. I would have said going into February or March that I would have my doubts about where Cam Calhoun plays. I would have my doubts about Draylon Washington, given their backfield. I think I've talked about Washington, but you didn't really know. I thought Hill Green maybe would be a big-time player, but are they going to start Lawson and Justin Jefferson when Lawson's healthy and Jefferson's healthy because he's been out? Or are they going to start Hill Green in one of those spots and put one of those Lawson or Jefferson as a third guy? Jefferson, I guess, would be the third guy. I don't know where exactly that snap count will be for Nakai Hill Green. Cam Dewberry, another guy that, again, you guys might speak specifically. I'm just going to speak generally, like would have penciled him in as a left guard starter. I'm not so sure about that right now. Kelby Collins, a guy that probably committed, I want to say before LT Overton was announced as coming back.
Yeah.
I think that hurt him in the sense of where he might play because I don't know where he's going to play right now. And Kane Womack bringing up him playing on the inside, which was considered maybe not a great fit for him at Florida, is interesting as well. And, Horton, I think, is a guy that I think got banged up, hurt first day of practice. So maybe there's not a huge amount of sample size there with him yet. But overall, like the classes has kind of shifted where I might see the greatest value or the greatest contributions coming from this class. And at the end of the day, I still think they're going to try to be active in the spring portal market to hit at certain positions, probably offensive tackle being one of them, maybe defensive tackle being another one of them. And I guess my overall point would be like, some of these guys may not have as big a role as we thought. Some guys might have a bigger role than we thought with the portal class. And that's still kind of developing at this point.
So if you were to, at this juncture of the offseason or spring practice window, power rank the transfers based on confidence level that you think they will contribute, who would be at the top of your list?
I would. It's a hesitation between Horton and Dre Washington. I do think Dre Washington. What?
Still has to be Horton. He's shown it. He showed it last year what he could do.
But so did Dre Washington. Dre Washington was a pretty productive.
I'm a big Draylon Washington fan,
right?
But they're going to throw the football 1,000,000 times this year if the offense is what they want it to be. And Draylon Washington's got an uphill battle to unseat a Jam Miller who they trust at that position. Do you think Draylon Washington can unseat Jam Miller?
I think there's a better chance of Draylon Washington unseating Jam Miller than I think Horton unseating Ryan Williams or Jeremy Bernard.
He doesn't have to, though.
But that's the whole point. I'm still curious what the snap count is for the third receiver in this offense and what the target count is for the third receiver in this offense. I do think it will be higher than last year. Sure as hell, I'm sure as Horton hopes so, because the third receiver in this offense last year was not particularly productive. But you also have a Jalen Hale. You also have a Rico Scott, who I think is a player that has been noticed by this staff so far this offseason. And you also have a Cole Adams, and you also have the freshmen in Latsier Brooks and Derek Meadows that people tend to get excited about as well. So where does that all come out to? Does that mean Isaiah Horton's on the field all the time as a third receiver? I have my doubts about that. I do have my doubts about
If
that.
they were better at tight end, I would agree with that, but they're not.
Right.
They're not going to be. Even
Don't
when
speak ill of Josh Cuevas like that.
But even if they have,
Josh Davis is an H-back, but that's not the point. The fourth receiver at Washington 2 years ago had 35 catches. That fourth receiver was Jeremy Bernard.
right.
The third receiver had 46 catches. There's going to be opportunities, and they ran two tight ends. They did a lot of that.
But
Are they going to be the
don't
Washington
know.
offense? Who the heck knows? But that's in their wheelhouse to be able to feature a third and fourth receiver.
As we learned last year, I don't know if we can take our trusty copy machine and take the
What the hell owns a
2023.
copy machine?
It's a printer.
No, that's an antique, dog. That's not. What is
Right.
that?
So you can't just take this and put the 2023 Washington offense,
That's
put
the
it
biggest
inside here,
iPhone I've ever seen.
hit copy, and have the 2023 Washington offense come out
What?
in the year 2025. Look at, see, this
Dude.
whole thing comes out.
You buy
You can't do that necessarily. But
How's your
that's
toner
what's going
looking?
to happen is that some people think you can just make a copy, and then all of a sudden,
I'm scared.
on this piece of paper, you have the stats of the Washington offense in 2025 for Alabama. I don't know if that's going to be true or not. So that's just my point, and I'm using props to make it.
If
When CBS
That's
calls for you to
recovery.
do a preseason Alabama football hit, can you please do that again? Because
Yeah.
that was spectacular.
I mean, I learned from Sal Palantonio. You
I
hold up
will
the
say-
newspaper. This is actually just what my house insurance, but he holds up the newspaper,
I hope
says,
you're
I'm in
having-
Philadelphia this morning, and this is what they're talking about.
when a homeless
Learn
man
from the
like my
best.
friend did, Johnny Manziel. Never forget.
I wanted to circle back on a point about Nikai Hill-Green because he is going to get a lot of run this spring with Jefferson limited and Lawson out. He's probably going to have the green dot because of that, because behind him, there's Caden Jones, who's been in the system for a year, and then a lot of freshmen that they're excited about, but they're still freshmen. When it comes to Nikai Hill-Green, I wanted to circle back on a point that you made about, because it sounds like when Lawson's healthy, he's one of the middle linebackers. Could this spring potentially be an opportunity for Nikai Hill-Green to make a push to make that interior LB2 race interesting between him and Jefferson?
I would have thought going into the spring that Hill Green is your starter and Jefferson's still your third guy. But I know some people are really, really, really high on Justin Jefferson.
I don't know that I'm really, really high on him, but like coming back, knowing the system, he started a few games last year after Lawson went down, generally a pretty productive player. I'd like to think that experience probably gives him an edge, at least in that race, to see who the second interior linebacker will be.
Does it matter if he's the starter or not? Because
Right.
how many reps did Jefferson play last year off the bench? I mean, this defense, Kane has shown that he will play three inside linebackers. Now, the caveat with that was you had Jahad Campbell, you're moving around a lot. Does he find another inside backer who he moves around in that way, and therefore he needs a third guy coming off the bench? I don't know that. I will say that Nikai Hill-Green has shown a propensity to get in the backfield. Look at his tackles for loss. Deontay Lawson, he does not rush the passer often. When he does, he's very effective. And Justin Jefferson, the production isn't there, but the athleticism to suggest that you could send him off the edge is absolutely there. So could he play around with that? And then basically who's a starter and who's not doesn't matter.
Part of it depends on how you view their playing styles and where things overlap, and are you trying to put a certain combination out there?
Jahad was a unicorn. That's the
Yeah.
the most difficult thing with talking about that position is like there's no 1-for-1 with Jahad.
So to put a pin on your point, the transfer class became more interesting after 3 spring practices, Mike?
Yeah, that's where I settle on. I'm with Alex that I'm not ready to make any declarative statements about players after 3 practices and a couple interviews here and there with guys.
What are you copying at home? Like you're scanning documents.
How do you know I'm
Or go and like copy their hands or their asses on there. Like, The young boys. I mean,
I was creating a password for a login, but I was copying the password to put it into the website. So I'm listening. I have emails coming in that I'm trying to look at while I talk about Nikhai Hill-Green and his potential role on Alabama in 2025.
I feel like we learned a lot of little things, maybe nothing like super big and groundbreaking, but first week of spring practice, one of the things that I learned is that the thing that I hoped for, I think is going to happen. And there's a lot of things that I hope for when it comes to 2025 Alabama. But one of the things that I know I've made a point on the show before, I don't think I've written it yet. Maybe I wrote it this past week. Wrote it. Words are hard.
Written Crimson Flame. Fight on, fight on, fight on.
I definitely didn't write that.
Tyler Buckner.
Is Tyler Buckner still at Notre Dame? Is he graduated yet?
He's probably in the creative lit department. Adjunct professor.
No, he's probably on Wall Street.
I hope not. I hope he's on Wall Street. I hope he's not still playing sports at Notre Dame.
I hope he's watching this podcast later in the day.
Although if he is watching this podcast, we got to give him his props. He won one ring with the lacrosse team and nearly won a second one with the football team.
No, here's your answer. He is an incoming 2025 equity research summer analyst at Goldman Sachs in New York City.
Hell yeah.
Told you he was on
Wall Street. Score on that guy. Unbelievable.
He got his master's in Notre Dame in May, or he will get his master's this May, I should say, in business analytics.
Hell yeah. Good for him. That's awesome.
He also lists on his LinkedIn page. He lists on his LinkedIn page MVP of the Gator Bowl.
He has a LinkedIn page? I'm going to add him.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at. MVP of the Gator Bowl.
Hell yes.
Tyler Buckner. View full profile. This is amazing. Oh, I can't add him. It says I have to follow him.
That is the duality of man right there.
He has a great college experience.
Yes.
Great.
I enjoyed talking to him at the Rose Bowl Media Day. He seems like a great kid.
Find you another Alabama sports podcast that talks about Tyler Buckner the way we do. You can't find it. It's not there. No, one of the things that we learned this week is that Kane Womack, as well as us, really likes his secondary. It also sounds like when it comes to the role at Husky, going to throw bodies at the problem. What do I mean by that? They're going to try. It sounds like they're going to use the depth that they have in the secondary to experiment a little bit here and there to see who wants to play that nickel slot corner position, which I personally am excited about. It sounds like Deshaun Jones is kind of the in-house leader at this juncture of the offseason. He also mentioned Dre Kirkpatrick Jr., Little Dre, as a guy who has kind of entered the fray in terms of the Husky position. But here's also what Kane Womack said about the Husky role in general. We've got a fairly deep secondary, and so there's a lot of positional crossover. Right now, it's trying to figure out, once we come back from spring break, who are the guys that are going to try to get a few extra reps at that nickel position, Husky position, and try to build depth for us as a defense, which is something we did not have in the secondary a year ago. I'm excited about this because I think there's a lot of different players that they could potentially use at that slot corner, nickel position, Husky position for various reasons. I'm of the belief that hopefully midway through the season, they have found some sort of rotation where they can get their best 5 defensive backs on the field, because I think that would give them a lot of flexibility. And I wonder, especially after hearing Kane talk earlier this week, we got to talk to him on Friday. So most recent coach that we heard from. So maybe that's why it's probably top of mind. But hearing him talk about guys like Cam Calhoun, the Utah transfer, spent some time in Michigan, the Ohio native from Cincinnati, that Kane said that he's got some stuff to him. We also saw a really good highlight where he ripped a ball away from Jalen Hale during one of the scrimmages. Seems to be a little ball hockey, seems to maybe talk a little bit more than most other guys in that secondary room. I wonder if he could potentially play a little bit of slot corner, maybe not so much as kind of like the third safety on the field, but he seems to have the coverage skills to do that. I wonder if they maybe slide Zabian Brown or Damani Jackson into the slot corner at times so they can get Dijon Lee on the field. I wonder if that's potentially a role for some of the other younger defensive backs like an Ivan Taylor or a Zay Mincy if they can't overtake Bray Hubbard or Keon Sabb for the other safety spot. I feel like there's a lot of experimentation that they can do, and it was good to see Kane say, yeah, we're probably going to experiment a little bit with this over the course of the spring just to kind of see what we can do here and what we feel comfortable with. I personally got excited about that. What do you guys think?
Is it kind of weird that we haven't mentioned the name Red Morgan at all? And that Kane did not mention the name Red Morgan when I asked him about the Husky position the other day? That a year ago at this time, Red Morgan was a freshman that everybody was buzzing about. And granted, that was because the secondary was decimated at this particular juncture of last year. But you would have thought like maybe second year, maybe steps into the Husky role. Instead, you're talking about Dre Kirkpatrick being maybe the number 2 guy if Deshaun Jones is hurt or whatever. Just weird. Where does Red Morgan fit into all this? In fact, he's been practicing with the corners, or at least when we were out there, as opposed to the safeties, which is a little bit different than what they were doing in the fall. So I don't know. That's an interesting guy that I would have thought a month or two ago would have been right in the middle of that Husky competition.
Well, I guess I'll answer that question by asking this. Is it a good thing that he's not near the top of the depth chart at Husky or even at safety? Because look, it was exciting to see freshmen on the field last year.
Right.
He was one of those dudes where when he was good, it was fun to see him fly around and do some stuff. But when he was bad, he blew coverages.
I don't think it's a good thing. No, I mean, I don't know if he's like at corner. You got some dudes out there. You got some 5-star Damani Jackson, Xavier Brown, Dijon Lee. I mean, Cam Calhoun's not a 5-star, but those are your top 4. And if all hell breaks loose, you can put Jalen Bakwe, who's also a 5-star back at corner too. So I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing for Red Morgan. And then
maybe not for Red, but a good thing for Alabama's secondary depth.
Oh yeah, for them. Yeah. I'm just talking about Ivan Taylor coming in at safety. Like you're kind of boxed out at a few different spots. I'm just, again, a guy that we have these shows. We talk about guys a year ago. We were talking about, hey, Red Morgan's going to make a big impact. And now we're talking about where the hell does he fit?
I think that's fair. Alex, how do you feel about the Husky position, potentially lack of Red Morgan, anything else we've already touched on?
No, I like the fact that they're going to run a bunch of bodies out there because I wrote about it coming out before spring practice that as much as I like Devontae Smith as a player, they weren't getting a ton of high-end production at that position. Not a lot of negative plays, not a lot of turnovers, and the ability to get a little bit more there, I think, is interesting. If at the end of the day it's Deshaun Jones, that's fine. He's a solid player, played well replacing Devontae late in the season. But they have so many guys with such interesting body types that you can see playing multiple positions. So I think this is a battle that is not going to get resolved in the spring. And I don't think that's a necessarily bad thing because, as I alluded to, you still have guys coming in. With Chuck McDonald coming in a corner, another 5-star. So I could see a scenario where it changes week to week too, or opponent to opponent, because you might need a different thing at that position. You're going to need a very different slot corner potentially versus, I know they don't play Ole Miss versus a Georgia or a Tennessee versus a Georgia. So, could it be a mix up of guys? I think that's also in the cards.
I like that. I like that thought of just kind of being, I don't know, flexible as a secondary, because when you play Georgia, you probably want Bray, right? Like playing a little bit more in the role like that. But then when you're playing at Tennessee, you probably want the third corner out there, or somebody who's maybe a little bit more, I guess, like faster, a little bit, has bigger, higher ceiling, more playmaking ability, something to that effect, because you're going to cover probably a speedier receiver as opposed to when you play Georgia, it might be a tight end who is that third pass catching option, so to speak. So I like that. I think I don't know. I'm excited to see how that develops over the spring. And I agree with you, Alex. I don't think that's something they need to solve over the next 12 practices. I think it's something that they are fine to probably experiment with and figure out what works and what doesn't, and what they can do when it comes to fall camp.
I think we're going to see a ton of rotation in the back end of the defense the first 3 weeks of the season. I mean, they did a lot of it last year, and we ended up, the starters were the starters down the stretch. I think that's going to be even more so this year because you do have so many players who you think you can get something out of, and you want those young guys to get experience.
Yes and no. So I feel like they're in a better spot in the secondary than they were at this point last year. In fact, I would say it's one of their strongest, deepest positions.
I would argue the strongest on the roster.
Right. And it's like, are you really going to take Damani Jackson and Xavier Brown off the field as much as you did last year when you were when things were in question more, or Keon Sabb, or even Deshaun Jones if he's reliable 5th-year guy, Bray Hubbard now that he's emerged? like, I don't know. I don't know if you're actually going to do that as much. Plus, your schedule doesn't allow for it as much because you don't play those 2 cupcake games in September anymore, like you used to. Last year, it was South Florida and Western Kentucky. Yes. How dare I forget? Be chided by people on this beat. There's only one of those this year, and that's ULM. And otherwise, you're going to Florida State and you're hosting Wisconsin. Now,
yeah,
in either
they're 2-10
case,
Florida State.
There's a I was going to say there's a chance that Florida State qualifies as having some
Right.
icing and some sprinkles on top of it.
But let's be real. Like, going to Florida State for a season opener is still
You're not
potentially
going to prepare for that. You're going to hope that's what happens.
a much more challenging game than hosting Southern Miss or Utah State or Middle Tennessee State, some of those openers that they've had in years past. And then, Wisconsin, I think you could handle that game and maybe in the second half have a chance to see some other guys. But I don't think by default you're looking at that as much with your schedule this season. And then, going to Georgia, like if you're rotating 15 different guys in the secondary, we'll see how that goes. I don't know.
On paper, a much tougher non-conference early season slate as opposed to what they saw last season. So I think you'd like to see them have most of the secondary rotation down, or at least I think we kind of know who at least 4 of the 5 starters are going to be in the secondary. We'll see kind of what happens with Husky, but I think some of those games you don't want to see as much rotation, at least maybe early on, like we saw last year, just until at least you get the game under control. Then maybe in the second half you can sprinkle in some of those other guys and let them get some key playing experience. But that'll be something fun to kind of monitor through the spring and even through fall camp, just kind of the mixing and matching and what they're able to do with those guys. Alex, we're circling back to you. What's another thing you learned first week of spring ball?
All right. I'm going to be self-indulgent, and I'm going to talk about the bandit position and 2 players there. Well, one of the self-indulgent part is I wrote about LT Overton. We got to talk to LT. The idea of him closing the gap between a guy who gets pressures and a guy who gets sacks. And Kane Womack talked about how, there's things he can do in his end in terms of putting him in other positions, letting him know that this is a pass rush opportunity and to treat it as such. And then hearing from LT just the confidence that he has that is different now. He talked about it at length about how he's no longer having to overthink things as he did last year, trying to learn a new defense. And he said he feels like he did in high school again, which is a good thing because he was a 5-star and the top defensive lineman in his class coming out. So can he take that next step? I think Alabama has to have that. With Jahad Campbell gone, they need an alpha who can get to the quarterback. He's shown he can get to the quarterback. He needs to bring the quarterback down. If he can be a double-digit sack guy, that's what he said his goal is. This defense is drastically better overnight. Can they get that out of him? I think that's potentially in the cards. The other thing is, we have to say it, Keon Keeler. He's been mentioned a few times now. I've heard about him behind the scenes as well. He's a guy. And I know, like shades of Ben Davis, like top 5-star. Is he ever going to play? We don't know. Like, can he get his head screwed on right and learn the defense and all of those things? He's a freakish talent, and they all recognize that. But there's this cautious optimism that, hey, maybe this thing's happening. If they can get him in there and it's part of that rotation, I think it could be really interesting. There's a lot of bodies. Mike has talked about this at the bandit position. And how do they all fit? But they need to throw everything they can because they've got to be better at rushing the passer. I think they were 69th in the country at sack percentage.
Not nice.
Very not nice.
No. They were in the 60s or 70s in negative plays. That's the focus of the spring. That's what number one thing Kane talked about, creating negative plays. If they can do that, again, that's what held the offense back. Too many getting behind the sticks. The defense can do that. They put themselves in a much better position. I think the biggest piece of all of that is LT and where he goes next. Maybe a nice little subplot is Keon Keeler.
LT Overton, 39 pressures last year, only 2 sacks. His 39 pressures were, I believe, top 10, top 12 in the SEC when looking at individual pass rushers. So he was good. He was good. I think converting those pressures into sacks can turn him from good to great, could solidify first or second round NFL draft status would also, to your point and what you wrote, Alex, go read it on Bama247.com, would obviously be a massive, massive help to Alabama's defense, which I think we can all agree rounded into a pretty good unit, maybe not a great unit or an elite unit, but a pretty good unit by the end of the year. Having a consistent disruptive pass rushing presence will only raise the floor, I think, of the operation in total. But Mike, I'll loop you in here. The point on Keon Keeley. I'm at the point where I need to see it to believe it. Where are you at when it comes to Keon Keeley? And is this just a spring practice guy who will make waves every now and again? Or do we think this could be the year he finally pops?
I don't know about the latter yet. If you're trying to do your two deep for the defensive line, Overton, Jordan Renaud, Tim Keenan, Jeremiah Beeman, James Smith, Edric Hill. Where does Keon Keeley fit into that? I don't know. Where does Kelby Collins fit into that? I don't know. Where does Stephen Bumua fit into that? I don't know. If healthy, Fatsu Soa Henry, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, no longer Cavante Henry. Does he play bandit? Does he play on the outside? Does Jamarian Latham from Wolf ever play down on the edge? I don't know. But those are probably your top 6 guys. Smith, Keenan, Overton, Renaud, Hill, Beeman at the moment. Where's the opportunity to play? For Keeley, he needs to overtake Jordan Renaud, who overtook him essentially last year. That's what needs to happen. And until it happens, I can't say it's going to happen, if that makes any sense. And if you're not one of those top 6, then I think your playing opportunities are going to be pretty limited. And that same conversation applies to Kelby Collins, going back to the whole transfer portal thing. So I don't know.
Personally,
Yanzai Pierre in that mix too.
He's in the Wolf room.
He's in the Wolf, but then in same thing applies to him.
Yeah.
Quay Rusa, Jamarian Latham, Pierre, Fatsu Soa Henry. Noah Carter was a guy that they seem to be excited about. He's like their 4th Wolf right now. Where is he going to play? Like, when would he play? I don't know.
The one role that's it's a niche role that they don't really have is the 3rd down pass rusher. Just turn him loose. He's running off the edge. I think part of that is because they last year did not have a premier pass rusher, a Tim Williams type who could do that. There aren't many Tim Williams walking this earth, but they need somebody who can just run off the edge. Is that Keon Keeley? I don't know, but I'm very curious to see if somebody bubbles up as a guy who's like, look, we don't love him against the run. We don't love him in packages where he's got a lot of responsibility, but if it's 3rd and 6 plus, and we know what the offense is going to do, and we just say, hey, go get the quarterback. Don't worry about anything else. I'm very interested if they can find that guy. Because if they had him last year, he didn't pop. So I think there's that role out there that I don't know who necessarily fits it.
I feel like they've got a number of pass rushing options, but in terms of like guys who are proven, small number, in addition to the lack of interior depth. That is something to be concerned about if you would like to be concerned about that.
Yeah,
the days of the cheetah package running out there, gone.
They don't have the right bodies for that. Yeah. Even Keon Keeley now at 280 pounds, I don't know if he's really the guy that's going to be the tackle off the edge. I mean, the guy that was probably doing it the best for them the last year or two is Hugh Robinson. Yeah. Right. And he's gone now too. I don't think Jamarian Latham's really that guy.
Justin Hill is the guy who you wonder as a true freshman, could he fulfill that role?
But in his case, you're talking about overcoming Jamarian Latham, Yanzai Pierre, Noah Carter, Fatutoa Henry. Big climb.
Rashawn Evans, when he was a freshman, was pretty good rushing the passer on 3rd down, and there were probably 12 linebackers who were more experienced playing more than him. If the dude can burn off the edge and get to the quarterback, you put him on the field.
We'll see what happens. Mike, what's another thing you learned first week of spring?
I feel like we're not going to see much on A-Day is my other observation. I think people are wondering about or potentially interested in is what happens on A-Day. Again, it was already modified last year. People forget that. That was different than what the Saban format was, if you will, where it was team 1, team 2, essentially first team offense, first team defense, second team offense, second team defense going at each other. It was just offense versus defense, and they kind of made up this scoring system for the defense that, quite frankly, was a little bit hard to follow during that game. And then this year, I think their biggest problem is the offensive line and the health. You don't have Caden Proctor, or he's limited. Jane Roberts is coming off of an injury. Your right tackle, Wilkin Formby, I think he missed practice last Wednesday. We were there because of an illness, but your depth is very thin along the offensive line. You're playing guys at spots that you maybe didn't think you would. You have Harkwell Anugwam, who's out there with the first team at left tackle when we were out there last Wednesday, who's barely played football. You have Casey Poe, who you've moved to tackle, essentially. You've had Olas Alanen, who's playing some tackle. I don't know if you necessarily want to expose all that on A-Day. Not that it'll be on TV anyway, but I think that's potentially their biggest impediment to being able to field more of a traditional A-Day game. And overall, I still think it's something that if this offense, if this quarterback situation doesn't look great by, not that we would see it much in August, but probably more September, I think it's something that we might hear referenced, like, hey, remember back in the spring, like we were dealing with a pretty rough offensive line, or maybe it's still the case in the fall. Who knows? Like, it's one of those things that might have the potential to kind of stunt the overall momentum of the offense just because you're not able to practice quite as effectively as I think you would hope to be able to, because you're down some guys there and you're still looking for a starter at left guard. You're looking for consistency at right tackle out of your starter. I feel like it's several months from now, it's something that's going to be referenced as maybe holding back the development of the offense as a whole. But specific to A-Day, I think it could be something, and maybe the injuries overall, but probably more so the offensive line that holds back Alabama from fielding a traditional A-Day.
If we had to guess right now or make a bet right now, do we think it's closer to just like a standard practice, or do we think there could be scrimmage elements to it?
I think it would be like fan day.
Yeah, they're not going to show anything. They don't want to show their depth. They don't want to show anything at all. Even though it's not going to be on television, I don't think they want any hints of anybody who they think is any good. Because they're scared to death, just like every coach out there right now, apparently. They're all drinking the Kool-Aid. They're all paranoid. Somebody's going to come steal our guy. And I said it on the podcast a month ago. I'm going to say it again. I don't know a single player who's bubbled up in a spring game who's really mad. I just don't. It doesn't tend to pan out, but that's their thinking right now. So I don't think they're going to show anything. It would not surprise me if Keelan Russell is throwing footballs into a bucket because it's cool.
Fans will get excited as
they will. That. It'll be the Elite 11.
So will I. I think that's a cool drill.
Yeah. It's a drill.
Look, I told you this watching Fan Day last year. I watched that drill 15 years ago at Patriots practices. Tom Brady, Brian Hoyer, some other slapdick at quarterback. By the way, Kevin O'Connell, who's now the coach of the Vikings. Yeah. Tom Brady was not always the best quarterback at throwing the ball in the bucket. Yeah. There was other quarterbacks who had better days at doing that. Tom Brady's the best quarterback who's ever lived. So again, there's some value to that drill, but let's not draw too many conclusions from stationarily throwing a ball into a trash bucket in the corner of the end zone. As cool as that might be, as exciting as that might be for fans.
Yeah.
Do we prefer the quarterbacks throwing the ball into a bucket in the corner of the end zone, or when they try to hit the crossbar on the field, on the goalpost?
No, I don't care about either one of them.
Okay, Mike.
Throw him to a moving
target. Up, who's now gone at punter, would stand at an angle from the goalpost before every game.
Yeah, so, during warmups, yeah.
So like it's like this, a very tight window, and you try to get it right through that tight window.
Or he would either try to like cut it through, or he would sometimes just try and purposely hit the crossbar. Or not the crossbar, but one of the uprights. To use the Australian vernacular again, he was a certified weapon.
You know what I want to see? One-on-one. I want to see RIP the Oklahoma drill. Like, you want to see that.
Fans would love that.
Oh, my God.
I would love that. I think that's can you imagine LT Overton against Proctor if they were both healthy in the Oklahoma drill? Like that. You want to make money to pay your athletes? That you do like an hour of Oklahoma drill and you fill that stadium.
You know who you need blowing the whistle? You need Roll Tide Willie blowing the whistle to run the Oklahoma drill. No. That would break the internet.
No.
So you're welcome, Greg Byrne. There's an idea.
It's over. It's done. We're not going back. It's over.
Things that are done. Roll Tide Willie. Lank. The Crimson Crane. But the Crimson Crane is coming back.
The Crimson Crane is not dead.
That is the weirdest conversation this week.
Yes.
Does Auburn really think that's their thing?
They wanted a technical for it.
It
It was taunting.
remember Javion Cohen at Alabama? It was after the Iron Bowl in 2021 when they did the Crimson Crane in Jordan Hare Stadium, and then Auburn was getting ready for the Birmingham Bowl. I think it was like Hoover High or something, and Javion Cohen went up on the hillside and took a video of himself doing the Crimson Crane over their practice.
How did I miss that? That's awesome.
That's kind of
You
funny.
remember that?
That is dedication to hatred.
Yeah.
Shout out to Days. Last thing, one of the things I learned is that the freshman offensive linemen are going to get quite a bit of run this spring. Left tackle seems to be a revolving door at the moment. One of the guys who was in that revolving door was one Michael Carroll. Also, Jackson Lloyd seems like he's going to get a little bit of run at tackle this spring, which, he's a top 60 recruit. He's probably a future starting offensive tackle. Could the future be as soon as, I don't want to say as soon as this upcoming season, but it seems like he is going to get quite a bit of run this spring. Michael Carroll's at least going to get reps. I'd like to see him more at guard because I think when potentially Alabama's best offensive line includes him at left guard, if he shows that he's as good as I believe that he really is. But for him to get reps there, Jackson Lloyd to get reps there, I'm encouraged to see what that means for their development over the next 12 practices. I'm excited that 3 practices in, the coaches were already name dropping him. I know that DeBoer was asked specifically about Michael Carroll, but Grubb was asked about just the offensive line unit and piecing it together because of all the injuries. And he immediately mentioned Jackson Lloyd as a guy that's out there and he's getting reps and he thinks that that's really important. And if he's going to be a starter, will probably be at right tackle. So we'll see what that means for him in Formby. And that probably won't get hashed out until fall camp. The young offensive lineman getting high-level reps in the spring. I think that's something that I learned, and that's something I'm excited to hear more about.
On March 11th, I'll ask you both. Who do you think plays more snaps, Jackson Lloyd or Michael Carroll? I
feel inclined to say Carroll, if we're talking specifically the 2025 season.
Because I think it's Lloyd. I think Lloyd being the swing tackle is a real possibility.
Right. Unless you can find somebody in the portal, I think there's a better chance of Lloyd getting on the field as a third tackle than there is Carroll getting on the field as a 4th or 5th guard, depending on where you rank Rock Montgomery.
And they like Gino Vandemark. I'm just going to keep saying it.
Oh, yeah. Gino's a Chris Kapilovic guy.
If they need a guy to come in and play 4 snaps while a guy's injured, are they going to ask the true freshman or are they going to ask the guy who's been with Cap for a few years now?
Here's what Grubbs did say about Michael Carroll when asked specifically about him. I will say this. I thought during Coach Ballou's 4th quarter program, Michael was a guy that continued to climb and accept the challenge of being out there and working hard. I hope that translates to some good football this spring. He also mentioned that Michael's a guy that he's got a ways to go. And I'm not sure that him playing both some guard and having to fill in at tackle because Caden Proctor is limited over the course of the spring is maybe the best thing for my theory that he should be the starting left guard, especially if Gino continues to rack up all those reps and Dewberry gets into the mix there. The coaching staff may just feel more comfortable with those guys. I don't know. I'm betting on the 5-star. Like that's really where I'm standing my ground.
Look, I think Michael Carroll is going to be a really good player. I think it's an interesting question of this season and needs and fit. And I think that's Jackson Lloyd. They don't make 6'7", 310-pound guys who play 3 sports and can switch in.
Speak for yourself.
You're 6'6", 310?
Yeah.
Not quite. I did measure my wingspan the other day.
Just
I forget what it was, though.
Shits and giggles?
Yeah. Because I saw all these combine measurements. I'm like, man, I wonder how I stack up. I forget what it was. I was like 70-something inches, but.
Some might say that's a lot. Did you go to the gym and do bench press reps? Like how many of 225 did you get up?
No.
See, that's where I'll probably trust Jackson Lloyd a little bit more.
I did ground to overhead yesterday, but.
Just one foul swoop, or did you like snatch and then?
No, it was 9 factorial.
Okay. We need to go find a gym when we go travel for the NCAA tournament. You can come work out with me.
You guys can enjoy that yourselves.
I had to do hotel gyms. I was stuck on the West Coast, which we kind of got lucky in LA. That was a pretty good hotel gym.
That was a nice hotel.
Yeah. It was right down the street from Crypto Arena. The gym was at the top, and I had a really good view of downtown LA while I was running. It was a good time. And, Alabama won 2 games and went to the Final Four. So it was entertaining in more ways than one. to recap some of the things that we learned from the first week of spring ball, Alex learned that Keelan Russell is good and that the bandit position has a little bit of added pressure on them. Mike learned that the transfer class is interesting and that A-Day is interesting, I suppose. I learned that the Husky role is wide open and they're going to throw bodies at that problem, and that also the younger offensive linemen are going to get some serious high-level reps over the course of the spring. That was the first week of spring ball. Again, they're off this week. Alabama will return back to spring practices next week. I believe they have 2 practices, or at least we have 2 media availabilities next week. And spring practice will roll on. So we'll be a little bit more touch and go, I think, this month. I was going to save this for Thursday show, but I may as well say it now and on Thursday show, just with the podcast and some traveling and what we're doing with March Madness and also spring ball. It's going to be a little up in the air in terms of shows. We're still going to try to bring you guys 2 a week. Just a heads up now, it could be a random Monday, Friday. It could be Tuesday, Wednesday, back to back. It could be however we're able to get on the mic and discuss Alabama sports topics between spring football and the March Madness run, however far Alabama is able to go. Just wanted to give you guys that heads up now. But we do appreciate you guys listening to this show. Again, we'll be back later this week to talk more a hoops-centric podcast. In the meantime, though, be sure to rate and review this show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 247 and 24/7 Sports. We had a lot of content last week from all of the spring football availabilities. We're going to have even more, plus some hoops coverage coming up later this week, even more spring ball stuff coming up in the weeks ahead. We don't want you guys to miss a thing, so check out the show notes and subscribe. As always, we appreciate you guys for listening. We'll talk to you all again soon.